Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Samson Mow, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Blockstream. Previously, I was the CEO of BTCC, an exchange, also known as BTC China. And before that, I was at Ubisoft working on games. So the talk I'm going to give today is about the rise of digital money and the role that Bitcoin will play in the future. So a bit more about Blockstream. We are a blockchain infrastructure company primarily, founded in 2014. We have about 45 people worldwide. We're very decentralized, very distributed. We have people in North America, Europe, and in Asia. And we have a few products right now. We have this federated sidechain called Liquid. It is a federated chain that's pegged to Bitcoin, but can be also pegged to other coins. It's meant to be an inter-exchange settlement network that will allow people to move money very rapidly between different exchanges around the world. We also have Green Address. It is an industry-leading non-custodial Bitcoin wallet for Android and iOS. And we have Elements, which is a platform built on the Bitcoin code base. So we forked Bitcoin to build Elements. And that's where we do the vast majority of our R&D. And last year, we launched a service called Blockstream Satellite. So this is actually a satellite service that broadcasts Bitcoin blocks. Currently, it's not yet covering Asia, but we're rolling out phase 2, which will cover all of Asia. This is actually one of the most interesting and inspiring projects we have. So it's covering a massive area of the Earth. We use geosynchronous satellites, which are about 35,000 kilometers out in space, and that is more robust than CubeSats, which will typically degrade and fall back into Earth's atmosphere after a few years. It's meant to offer a layer of resiliency to Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin is to become a global financial network, we cannot have undersea cables being cut by boats and things like that. So we need another layer on top of it to ensure that blocks can keep flowing. And that's where the satellite service comes in. So if you're receiving the blocks, then you don't really need internet to get the blocks of the Bitcoin blockchain. And potentially, we can broadcast other blocks over this service down the road. It's also privacy preserving. We don't know who is using it. As long as you have a satellite dish, you can receive the blocks. And it's also free. So if you're in some remote region, you can actually receive Bitcoin without internet, and there's no cost. For countries that have high costs on bandwidth, you can actually get 5, 6 gigabytes of Bitcoin's blockchain every month at no additional cost, and it doesn't use up your data cap. We also contribute to many open source projects. So we contribute to Bitcoin Core. That's the client that most people use to run for Bitcoin. The company is actually founded by several Bitcoin Core developers originally. We also contribute to Lightning. It's a layer 2 protocol that sits on top of Bitcoin, and it's interoperable with other chains like Litecoin. But it's a decentralized network, and it's a protocol to do micropayments or even nano payments. And recently, we released Lightning Charge. It's a plugin that hooks into C Lightning. C Lightning is our implementation of the Lightning protocol. And what Lightning Charge lets people do is web developers can now create apps, Lightning apps, which we call LApps, and connect to C Lightning and transact Bitcoin that way. Also, we have a smart contracting language called Simplicity. So it's a smart contracting language that allows for possibly smart contracts to be written in Bitcoin and other blockchains in the future. So Simplicity is actually a very low-level language, and there's meant to be other languages built on top of it. But the base language of Simplicity is so simple that it fits on top of a T-shirt. So I'll go into the talk now. So I want to talk about the history of money and how we got to where we are today with things like fiat currencies and where Bitcoin will come in. So originally, we started with bartering and then had government-issued currency and then Bitcoin. So barter is probably the earliest form of money. That's when people are collecting things like seashells, rocks even, and furs. And it is inefficient because you have to have what the other party wants in order to be able to trade something. But what it did do is pave the way for collectibles. So collectibles are things like collectibles are seashells and animals and furs. So collectibles can be traded, but they're inefficient at moving through people's hands. And also, it allows for people to collect things in advance to trade for later on. So you can collect pelts, and then you can know that I can keep those for a while and trade them later on when I want, say, fish. But this helped a lot of economic development in the world because now we have this primitive money that we can use to actually transact. And you can plan for future demand based on what you produce or collect. So here's a quote from Nick Szabo. Basically, it's saying primitive money, like collectibles, they actually have a very low velocity. So it's hard to move these things around. And it's also not likely that they will be moved sometimes within a person's lifetime. And they actually appreciate in value. And typically, that increase in value is what allows them to even be moved later on. So now we get to gold. So gold became recognized as a store of value in the 19th century. And with gold coming into prominence, that allowed global trade to really flourish. But it did take a long time for gold to be recognized as a store of value. So gold is something that people started to appreciate for maybe hundreds or thousands of years before it really became a worldwide money or currency. So this is a quote from Keynes. He kind of mused about gold and what it allowed. So he was saying, you can order something by telephone, sip on your tea, and you can buy anything from around the earth and get it on your door later on. So gold meets the requirements for an ideal store of value because it is divisible, it's fungible, portable, durable, acceptable, uniform, and scarce. So it has a lot of really good properties that people grew to like and appreciate because back then you have gold or you have things like, you have other metals too, but they would also rust. But gold is non-corrosive, so it doesn't actually degrade or become worse over time. So gold is good, but it is not great because it's hard to store. With gold, you have to deal with demurrage, which is storing and securing it. So if I have a bar of gold, I can't just leave it on a table somewhere. I need to probably put it somewhere safe, maybe have a security guard to look after it and keep an eye on it to make sure no one steals it. Because gold is also a bearer asset. If someone takes it, then it's gone. You can't call somebody and say, hey, can I get my gold back? The total supply is also unknown, so we don't know how much gold there is out there. We have estimates, but it's not very concise. It's also not very easily divisible. It's malleable, but not easy to kind of segregate and use to pay. So you have coins and such things that are minted. But the problem with that is it can be counterfeited. You can mix gold with other things, other metals. You can weight gold with lead, and it's basically not valuable. But it can be turned into jewelry. That's the plus side. So now we move to fiat. So fiat just means something that is created without much effort, just created out of thin air. So fiat currencies are created through authority, through a state or a central bank. And usually it's some decree saying this thing is valuable and you have to transact it and use this thing. So fiat money, therefore, is money that has value only because a ruler says it does. It's created out of thin air, and the money supply will typically devalue. The money will devalue because it will be produced more and more in greater quantities over time. So money always evolves in the following 4 stages. First, it's collectible. Then you move to a store of value. And that's when it starts being recognized as something that is safe to put your assets into. So if you buy something today, then it'll be worth at least that tomorrow. Property is a good example. People buy properties to essentially make sure that their assets don't degrade over time. Because if you just have fiat currencies, as more and more of it's printed, the purchasing power goes down and it gets worse. Once you have the store of value, then you can get to the point of a medium of exchange. And that's where people will accept that thing, whether it be gold or fiat, in exchange for goods and services. So many things could be a medium of exchange. We could use bottles of water or anything like that, but it has to have some value for people to accept it in exchange for other goods. And then finally, we get to unit of account. So when you have that medium of exchange and you have that store of value, then you can become a unit of account. So you have things that you can buy for $1. You can buy a bottle of water for $1 or buy a coffee for a few dollars. So Bitcoin is the first decentralized form of money. And it's actually evolving through those stages right now. Primarily, Bitcoin is still a store of value. It can be used as a medium of exchange, but in the current form, it's really just good for large amounts of money because it does take time to confirm a transaction. There is a fee you have to pay to miners to include your block into a blockchain. But it's evolving very rapidly. We're seeing the same evolution that, say, gold underwent, but in Bitcoin, and in a period of a few years. So Bitcoin is only 9 years old, whereas gold is thousands and thousands of years old as a store of value and a money. But we're witnessing this change right now before our eyes. So before Bitcoin, global transfer of value without reliance on trusted intermediaries was not possible. So when Keynes was giving his example of being able to buy something and having it delivered, he's still using a third party, a trusted third party or intermediary to move that money around. Even when you do a bank-to-bank transfer, you're relying on a network of correspondent intermediary banks to relay your money across. But what Bitcoin does is it allows us to send value directly to another party or another entity without the use of a middleman. And the emergence of Bitcoin is actually very unique. So it's the first decentralized money. And it's a singular event that cannot be replicated. So you have 0 to n, and then n to many. And Bitcoin was the first. So it's the first decentralized money that kind of grew organically from $0 into the amount we see today. And it's also decentralized, so no one actually has control over this asset class. So looking at Bitcoin as money using traditional classifications is hard because Bitcoin has a lot of features not shared with traditional money. It is largely software. So the Bitcoin network is secured by nodes, and each node is running a copy of the software. The software is backwards compatible, so older versions that didn't upgrade still can interoperate with the current versions and newer versions. But it's this set of consensus rules that everyone abides by that gives life to this money. So this is kind of a summary. I'll just run through quickly. So Bitcoin is trustless, whereas fiat is trusted. Monetary policy is determined by consensus. So for Bitcoin, if you're running a node and you're enforcing the consensus rules, then basically that is it. So there's a $21 million Bitcoin cap, and that cannot be changed unless everyone decides to change it. There's a set emission rate, and there's a provably finite supply. So we know that there are only 21 million Bitcoin in existence, whereas we have a rough idea of how much gold there is, a rough idea of how much silver there is, and a rough idea also of how much fiat currency there is. We actually don't really know exactly how much fiat currency there is in circulation. It's globally accessible, it's permissionless, there's no barriers to entry, it's easy to participate in the network for very low cost, and it's money through social agreement. But most importantly, it is verifiable. So everything with Bitcoin you can verify. You can verify a transaction, you can verify the code, and you can verify the entire blockchain from the very start to finish. Fiat is basically top-down control, and it's the opposite. So I'll just skip through that. This slide is just summarizing the previous slide. So Bitcoin as digital gold. Why is Bitcoin better than gold? So Bitcoin's rules are easily enforced. As long as you're running a node, you're enforcing the rules of the network. And those consensus rules are, there's a lot of them, but the most well-known ones are the coin limit, the block size, the block times, etc. But there's actually a lot of rules that everyone running a client is enforcing. Verifying Bitcoin can be done with very cheap hardware, and also the time to verify a transaction is very fast. So you can sync and verify the entire blockchain in just a few hours. So this is a Raspberry Pi. It's $35. And if you buy one of these, then essentially you can participate in the network. You're running a full node. You can validate and send your own transactions. And if you receive a transaction, you can validate that it's legit and you actually have the funds. And if you combine this with the satellite service, then you don't have to pay for bandwidth either. So here's an example, another example of why Bitcoin is better than gold. So Bitcoin Talk is a forum, and there's a user there called Loaded. He moved 40,000 Bitcoin to another address, to a SegWit address, and it only cost $1 in fees to move about 400 million at that time. And if you look at some of the transaction details, he actually lowballed the fee, so he paid he paid a very low fee, but it's still confirmed in about 1 hour. He could have paid $5, $10 and had it confirmed in the next block, but I think he just wanted to illustrate the point. But you can pay very little to move a lot of money, and that point is lost on a lot of people. That they're thinking, this blockchain, how much throughput do you have? How many transactions per second? But with Bitcoin, you're actually able to transact large volumes for very small fees. And there is a global pool of liquidity that supports changing to other currencies as well. So to sum it up, it's 400 million transacted in about an hour for $1. And you can contrast this with moving gold. So there was an operation where Germany was trying to repatriate gold that was stored in France and the US. And they're moving gold from vault to vault. And that took them several years at a cost of 7.7 million euros. So that is very, very expensive, a few orders of magnitude more than Bitcoin. So here's another quote. So one reason for gold's universal acceptance as money on the free market is that it's difficult to counterfeit. Its look, its sound as a coin are easily recognizable, and the purity can be readily tested. That's sort of true. So the purity of gold can be tested, but you actually have to melt it down first. You have to melt it down to analyze the purity of the gold content. And it's actually quite easy to make fake gold bars. If they're stored in a vault somewhere, someone could have access to the vault and switch them out with counterfeit, and you'd have to actually melt everything down and reforge it to verify the gold content you actually have. But with Bitcoin, you can actually verify it as long as you're running a full node for yourself. And there is a way to counterfeit a Bitcoin, and that is essentially brute forcing an address. And it'll take 35 trillion years to do that. Also, how do you spend an atom of gold? It's pretty much impossible. But Bitcoin is divisible and spendable. So you have a unit in Bitcoin called a Satoshi. So you have bits. It's typically the smallest amount that we transact in. It's 1/millionth of a Bitcoin. But you also have a Satoshi, which is 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So it's very, very small. And actually, Lightning supports sub-Satoshi level divisibility. So you can go even smaller than that. But what this allows is for Bitcoin to evolve simultaneously in all those areas as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, and unit of account. Because when you can spend Satoshis over Lightning, you can use a Satoshi as a unit of account. So if you're building some service, like an API, and you want to collect payment, you can collect 1 Satoshi. So the interesting thing is Bitcoin will keep evolving, and it will evolve in all 3 paths simultaneously because it is more than just money. Which leads me to the next part of the talk, which is Bitcoin as programmable money. So a lot of people think of Bitcoin as just this asset class or a method to do payment, but it's actually very programmable, and you can do a lot of interesting things with it. So there is already some deployed tech on the network. There's 4 simple programmable primitives. First one is multi-signature transactions, time locks, hash locks, and hash time lock contracts. Multi-sig is just having multiple people signing a transaction before it is executed. A time lock is I can say this transaction will unlock in X number of blocks on the blockchain or after a set time period. And a hash lock is when you reveal a chunk of information, then the output can be spent. So the transaction will go through. And hash time lock contracts is kind of a combination. But these 4 primitives lets us build very interesting stuff. The Lightning Network is based off of those primitives, and so are sidechains. But these are layer 2 scaling solutions that can live on top of Bitcoin and other Bitcoin-like blockchains. So we also come into Lightning apps now. We call them LAPs for short, with the advent of Lightning coming closer to beta. So for Blockstream, we actually created a week of LAPs. We released 7 LAPs in 1 week. We have vendor shopping LAPs like NanoPOS. It's a point-of-sale terminal that takes Lightning transacted Bitcoins as payment. We have a WooCommerce Lightning Gateway. It's a plugin for WordPress that allows you to take payments via WordPress with Bitcoin. And we have content creation LAPs like FileBazaar, so you can sell files, pictures, videos, sounds, and things like that for Lightning, Bitcoin transacted through Lightning. And then there's Lightning Publisher, so you can publish content and then charge a few Satoshis to let someone read the content and basically monetize content creation. And we have microservice payments, so we have PaperCall and IFPayTT. PaperCall is essentially a service that developers would use. So if you're doing some API call, you can actually collect payment in the form of Satoshis for that API call before it happens. And then we have some fun ones like a Lightning Jukebox where you can pay with Lightning to play different songs. And we have NanoTip, which is a tipping service that also uses Lightning. So there's a lot of interesting things coming down the pipe. We have signature aggregation, smart contracts, rootstock, also simplicity. We have bulletproofs, which is an improvement upon confidential transactions. So we can have increased privacy in the Bitcoin blockchain. Covenants are basically a way to create vaults where if someone accesses your coins or tried to take your coins, they can't actually spend them until a certain time has passed, giving you time to recover them. And you have scriptless scripts, which are a way to do more advanced Bitcoin scripting without adding additional scripts, and a lot more. So in closing, I guess the theme is that things have changed now with the adoption of Bitcoin throughout the world and the development of the technology. So Bitcoin's success is an unprecedented turning point in human history. Bitcoin allows information to be transacted as money, both trustlessly and programmatically. So it's a really big paradigm shift on par with things like the internet or the internal combustion engine. There's a lot more that is now possible through Bitcoin than previously we could have had. And finally, I'll leave you with a slogan that we like to use. It's called "Don't Trust, Verify." So this is basically the short form to sum up Bitcoin. You can verify everything for yourself by running a node and validating the blockchain, and you don't need to trust anybody else. OK, that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much.